This video will awaken your grip strength like it's a sleeper agent, and describing most people's hands as asleep is actually a very apt way to put it. Because the epidemic of very weak grip strength is not a matter of people just simply not training their grip enough. The problem is a lot more that people are trying to get good at the game of grip strength without realizing that their controller is unplugged. I don't know how this came to be, but it seems like the majority of people have largely forgotten how to engage the various muscles of the hand and forearm properly when making any kind of grip, which is a huge deal because if you manage to engage these muscles properly, as many grip genetic freaks do intuitively, you have both an immediately stronger grip whenever you make one and a much greater capacity to actually develop your grip through training. And if you fail to do so, it's not that you're only getting a debuff every time you grab something. It's that you've effectively disabled your capacity to get better grip strength from training, because you're failing to use and therefore develop many of the muscles that are important to having a maximally strong grip. Luckily, the answers to this problem are pretty simple to grasp. To understand the hands in the way that I'm trying to express, it's important that you think of your fingers as being analogous to little spines. If you tell somebody to lift a barbell in a deadlifting motion, a large majority of people intuitively will do it as an exclusive back lift and achieve the starting position by just contorting their back into a rounded shape, essentially forcing them to use the weakest muscles of their posterior chain to do most of the heavy lifting, and massively limiting not only their capacity to gain muscle from such a movement, but also their capacity to generate force in that position. What I'm arguing is that effectively the same thing is going on when people attempt to grasp things intuitively. They're essentially achieving the act of gripping by rounding their fingers forward, much like someone might round their spine forward, and they're holding their grip with what is effectively the hand's version of a Jefferson curl instead of a proper deadlift. To solve this problem and optimize this kind of motion in the deadlift, you would achieve the bottom position by using a style of hip hinging that seats your hips back further behind you and doesn't overly round your spine or extend it forward. And then once you've exceeded the kind of useful limit of your hip hinge, you would then bend your knees and end up in the bottom of an optimal deadlift, allowing you to recruit a ton of additional, very strong muscles like the glutes, hamstrings, and upper back to aid you in the motion, while also improving the leverage of the spinal erectors and allowing them to play mostly a supportive role. So how does this relate to gripping? Well, you can sort of think of your knuckles as being the hips of your hands. Instead of rounding your fingers forward, you can knuckle hinge when trying to close your hand by drawing your knuckles backwards in a way that allows you to achieve this sort of 90-degree position while keeping your fingers straight. If you're achieving this position properly, your fingers should feel extremely stiff and strong in that position, and you should feel a kind of tension in your knuckles. From here, you can then curl your fingers down normally until you achieve this kind of boxy, square hand shape, and make your nails look like this. To squeeze this grip, you would drive your fingerprints into whatever it is that you're holding, while also sort of extending your knuckles into it, just like how you'd sort of extend your hips into a deadlift. Gripping in this way alone is enough to massively improve your grip strength, but it can be extended even further by using other concepts further derived from deadlifting. For one, we can take a look at lateral bracing, the idea that you should apply tension down both of your lats and through your obliques, effectively by creating lateral tension in both directions, where if you only applied it in one direction, it would bend you sideways. You end up standing straight, but doing so under a lot of stabilizing tension that makes you stronger axially. And the same concept can be applied to your fingers by engaging the muscles that move your fingers laterally, that reside in the palm. Just by wiggling your fingers side to side, you can get a sense of engaging these muscles. And by trying to wiggle both directions at the same time, not unlike trying to flex your arm by co-contracting your bicep and your tricep to maintain this stiffened middle position, you can achieve a position of your hand that looks like this, where your fingers are individually tensed laterally in both directions in a way that stabilizes them axially. Combine this with the sort of knuckle hinging that we just talked about, and each of your fingers should be so stiffened and strong and reinforced that when you try to like break them backwards, you find yourself struggling to do so. And you should notice that that kind of force you're trying to apply is stretching and loading muscles inside of your hands that run down both fingers. Those muscles are essentially like your lats or obliques in your hands. Simply add that additional lateral tension when trying to make a grip in the fashion I showed previously, and you should be able to even further multiply your potential gripping strength. But we're still not done yet. We can go even further beyond. In the deadlift, most people brace their abdomen against an external support in the form of a belt. And the non-cowards among us just do this with the transverse abdominis, which has a similar effect. Now, there is no such equivalent structure in the fingers. There's nothing to support your grip forward and backwards, other than the weight you're holding. However, you can support your fingers against one another sideways, which effectively serves the same purpose.
Individually, we are weak, like a single twin, but as a bundle, we form a mighty fit.
Your fingers fit together very neatly, in a way where they almost seem optimized if you look at the fingers' ridges and bumps and valleys to fit together in a closed hand position, where they sort of reinforce each other via friction. Lean into this by binding your fingers together on top of the other two cues I've already covered, and your grip strength will be massively reinforced by distributing stresses that would normally affect one finger onto the entire hand. Everything we've covered so far not only massively improves your gripping strength, but also slightly improves your general upper body strength by giving you a greater connection to whatever it is you're trying to move. But to truly extract real upper body strength from my esoteric hand science, we'll have to move on to chapter 2 of this video: thumb positioning and rotation. Regardless of what grip shape you actually make with your hands, your thumb can perform one of two major actions. Your thumb can protract and internally rotate, engaging this meaty chunk in front of your thumb, or it can retract, engaging this meat behind the thumb, while externally rotating the thumb slightly, which means turning the thumbnail towards the fingers. And I think in many ways you can consider the thumb sort of like a gear shift knob in a car, where depending on how you manipulate it and in what position, you can alter the mechanics of your upper body movements. Thumb pushing and internal rotation seems to strengthen upper body mechanics in pushing, and this is most evident in something like a deep chest fly, where under normal circumstances with a neutral grip, the bottom position feels very disconnected, weak, and awkward. But by driving your thumb forward and into internal rotation, you can load a muscle of your shoulders, maybe in your rotator cuff, that you basically can't activate otherwise. And in that bottom position, you not only feel deeply connected to the weight, you should also experience a massive stretch accompanied by a reservoir of explosive strength you didn't have before, probably coming from that additional shoulder muscle engagement. And this is like a night and day difference. This same reservoir of extra strength is obviously also available to in most upper body pressing movements, like dips, shoulder press, and the bench press. If you're not already doing these grip cues intuitively, there's a good chance you can get a PR just by adding thumb drive to each of these pressing movements instead of having a neutral grip. What I find very interesting is that you can actually see people using these mechanics in sports. First, you can commonly see this thumb mechanic used in throwing athletes, and it makes complete sense. In fact, I think it might be one of the key factors in having a good throwing arm, because whatever reinforcement that happens in your shoulders when you drive your thumb in that way, it seems to make you absurdly strong, going from external rotation to internal rotation of the shoulder. And doing this is such an extreme difference that it makes me damn near impossible to Americana in jiu-jitsu, which is this shoulder lock that drives the shoulder into external rotation against your opponent's will. You can also sort of feel this by just miming a throw. If you internally rotate and project your thumb while making that square kind of hand shape we covered earlier, and put yourself into external rotation, you can feel a line of muscle connecting between your chest and your shoulder that receives a powerful stretch that gives you access to an explosive, springy strength to go back into internal rotation. And you just simply don't have access to whatever you're loading and stretching if you don't maintain that thumb position. Which is why you see it constantly in something like ideal javelin throwing technique or baseball pitching. Now let's take a look at the inversion of this position, thumb retraction and external rotation. What I noticed from doing this is that it seems to engage the muscles of the back in a way that makes them pretty dramatically stronger and amplifies general pulling strength. This also is pretty clear to see if you try gripping in a neutral position versus gripping in external rotation and retraction of the thumb. You should notice a significant strength difference and might even hit a PR immediately. Thumb retraction and external rotation also seems to reinforce general gripping mechanics, even in scenarios where the thumb itself isn't directly involved in gripping an object. This is put on best display in climbing, where many grips that don't involve thumb positioning seem to always have the athlete preferring a thumb cocked back position, which seems to be a prerequisite to accessing kinda end range finger strength. And if you try to kinda grab things with your fingertips, you'll notice that you can basically only do it while having your thumb retracted. Any other kind of thumb positioning makes your fingertips extremely weak, to the point where it feels like you can't even really engage them at all. Full disclosure here, I have no idea why these thumb mechanics work the way that they do. I don't really know all of their ramifications either. I'm also sure that you might be curious what happens if you use an incongruent thumb position, like retraction, when you're doing something like a pushing movement. I don't really know. My suspicion is that thumb positioning probably changes the muscular emphasis of various lifts in a very similar way that I talked about with general upper body and lower body limb rotation. And it might be that both of these thumb positions are valid in both pushing and pulling, but train different muscle groups, with the combinations I mentioned just being mechanically stronger. Now, to wrap this up, I'd like to say that as you get to use all of these gripping cues, you'll not only experience a dramatic immediate increase in your ability to grab things and manipulate them, but also a supercharged ability to generally train and improve your body, particularly the muscles of your grip, because you're now engaging a bunch of stuff you basically never used before, and are able to train it accordingly. And while this might take a little bit of time to get used to, as soon as you do, you'll basically forget how you ever grabbed objects before knowing all these details, and it'll become completely natural for you to do, and basically effortless. And with that said, that's about all I have about this matter with regards to lifting for now. However, there exists an entire fascinating and deep metagame of applying these gripping strategies and weaponizing them for the sport of jiu-jitsu and general grappling. If you guys would like to see that video, let me know in the comments. Also, if you're a subscriber, you can always hit me up at Darwinian_fitness on Instagram for a free 40-minute coaching call where I can help you troubleshoot your training, help you fix your injuries, or share some of the esoteric secrets I've yet to make videos on. Thanks for watching, and happy lifting.